My entire career vanished overnight, every achievement meaningless. I sank into despair, until a hidden inheritance appeared, buried in my father's diary. But it wasn't a gift. It was a challenge, a maze of trust funds, legal traps, and dangerous choices. One wrong step, and everything would collapse. Would I claim it, or let it consume me? I woke slowly in the pale gray light filtering through the half-open blinds of my Portland apartment, my body heavy with the residue of a night spent staring at the ceiling, wrestling with the unnameable tension that had been building for months. The room felt strangely cold, too orderly, as if everything around me had been placed with precision but without care. My desk gleamed with the reflection of a laptop I rarely touched before midnight, and my shelves displayed objects that signaled success. A carefully curated set of design books, an assortment of gadgets that never fully satisfied, and the occasional piece of artwork purchased more for status than for affection. I felt the weight of all of it pressing down on me, the realization that every carefully constructed detail of my life was devoid of warmth. On the corner of the desk lay a stark notice that I had seen before but had hoped to ignore, a digital printout indicating that the studio where I had devoted over a decade of my life was downsizing, and my position was among those marked for elimination. My chest tightened as I stared at it, the words seeming to float above the surface of the paper like a cruel emblem of inevitability. The initial shock gave way to a slow, gnawing panic that traced itself along the edges of my consciousness. Years of routine, of meticulously timed deadlines and carefully rehearsed interactions, had been predicated on the stability of this one institution, and now that certainty had been stripped away, leaving a raw emptiness I could neither fill nor escape. I rose from the chair and moved toward the window, pressing my hands against the cool glass. The city of Portland stretched out before me, a tangle of steel and asphalt punctuated by the neon signs of late-night cafes, the blinking advertisements of shopping districts, and the rain-slicked streets where pedestrians hurried with umbrellas in hand. The hum of traffic was constant, a low vibration that seemed to mirror the unrest in my own chest. I watched a tram slide silently along the tracks below, its lights reflecting in the puddles, and I felt a strange sense of alienation. This city, which I had always considered home, suddenly seemed foreign, as if the streets had rearranged themselves overnight to remind me that I was alone. I walked through the apartment slowly, noting the cold perfection of every corner, the absence of the small, human traces that might have softened it. The couch was immaculate, the cushions aligned with geometric precision, and the kitchen counters gleamed under the faint glow of overhead lights. Even the scent of coffee, brewing faintly from the machine I had left on for company I never expected, could not penetrate the emptiness that clung to me. Everything in this space, from the polished floors to the quiet hum of electronics, reflected the life I had built, but I realized that it was only a veneer, a carefully maintained facade that could not withstand the revelation that I had nothing else to hold on to. Sitting back at the desk, I stared again at the notice, the gravity of it settling into the marrow of my bones. The years of effort, the countless nights of work and creative energy, the small victories that had once felt significant, now seemed fleeting and hollow. I recognized, with a clarity that was both painful and liberating, that the life I had meticulously structured had relied entirely on external markers of success, and those markers had no power to sustain me when stripped away. The city continued its rhythm outside the window, indifferent to my presence, indifferent to my loss. I felt the first real stirrings of resolve, a slow, tentative awareness that the familiar structures of my life were gone, and that I would be forced to confront a reality where every choice, every step, would demand awareness and courage I had never before exercised. The rain began to fall, a soft tapping on the glass, and I watched as it traced erratic patterns across the pane, dissolving reflections and revealing the dark shapes of the streets beyond. In that moment, the illusion of control vanished entirely, leaving only the raw, inescapable weight of the present and the uncertain horizon ahead. I spent the morning surrounded by stacks of old papers, photographs with curled edges, and yellowed letters that smelled faintly of ink and dust, the remnants of a life I had only ever observed from the periphery. Each envelope I opened revealed a fragment of memory I had long ignored, a whisper of stories that belonged to someone else yet shaped the person I had become. My hands trembled slightly as I reached into the bottom drawer of my desk, the one I had avoided for years, and pulled out a leather-bound journal, its cover worn and softened by time. It was my father's diary, the man I had lost long before I fully understood him, and its presence in my hands felt like holding a heartbeat from the past. I began to read slowly, the words on the pages heavy with reflection and discipline, a window into the mind of a man whose quiet determination had always seemed distant and unattainable. I discovered details about family struggles I had never known, about decisions made in secrecy to protect futures I had taken for granted. Interspersed among the diary entries were letters carefully tucked between the pages, addressed to me, some never sent, some intentionally delayed, containing hints about a legacy that had been preserved but hidden. The realization hit me gradually, a weight pressing into my chest. My father had left behind more than memories, more than guidance. He had left me a chance, a complicated inheritance that spanned investments, trusts, and charitable foundations, all carefully structured and safeguarded. Access was contingent upon navigating a web of legal formalities and procedural hoops, a system designed to protect and challenge in equal measure. As I read, I felt the pull of nostalgia, the warmth of old recollections mingling with the sharp sting of loss. I remembered him in fragments. The faint scent of his aftershave in the kitchen, the scratch of his pen on ledgers late at night, the way he measured words before speaking them. And yet beneath the comfort there was an undercurrent of unease, a recognition that the past was not static, that the life he had designed, the rules he had set, demanded attention and action if I were to claim it. My imagination traced the possibilities, the doors this hidden wealth could open, the projects I could realize, the independence I could finally assert. But the path was not without peril. The conditions attached to the inheritance were precise, demanding vigilance, patience, and a discipline I was only beginning to understand I possessed. The afternoon faded into evening as I sifted through financial statements, old contracts, and faded correspondence. Each document added a new layer of complexity. A board meeting from years ago, a letter from a law firm outlining the terms of a trust, the subtle indication that my father had anticipated obstacles, both internal and external, that might delay or prevent me from stepping fully into my own life. The more I uncovered, the more I sensed a thread connecting the past to the future, a design I had not seen before. My father's hand seemed to reach across time, offering both challenge and opportunity, a test of judgment and resolve. By the time the room was bathed in the soft orange glow of the setting sun, I felt a strange mixture of apprehension and exhilaration. The discovery of this hidden inheritance, of these carefully constructed systems of influence and security, presented a formidable responsibility. The past had become a lever, a mechanism capable of reshaping my life if I chose to pull it, but only at the cost of confronting my own fears, my own untested capacity for decision-making and independence. I realized then that the security I had always sought in routine, in predictable success, could no longer sustain me. The future was uncharted, and the maps were in my hands. Every choice, every careful step I took, would determine whether I remained a passive observer of my life or became the architect of a new existence. The room, once suffocating with accumulated memories, now felt charged with possibility, and I understood that the next phase of my life would demand courage I had yet to summon, guided by the lessons and secrets my father had left behind. I moved deliberately, measuring each step, aware that visibility would compromise the quiet authority I intended to cultivate. I rented a small apartment on the outskirts of Portland, a place that allowed me to observe the city without being observed, where I could monitor streets, traffic patterns, and the rhythm of neighborhoods without drawing attention. From this vantage point, I studied the pulse of the city, noting the gaps in resources, the neglected lots, and the spaces that could be transformed into something meaningful. Every decision began with observation, every plan with research. Within weeks, I purchased a long-abandoned industrial warehouse on the far side of the district. The building had once been a hub of activity, but it now stood silent, its windows boarded, walls streaked with years of rain and neglect. I saw potential where others saw decay. Slowly, I began converting the space, starting with the structural essentials: roof repairs, reinforcement of the foundation, and updating utilities. I refused to rush, understanding that permanence required patience and meticulous attention. The renovation was not a spectacle. It was deliberate and quiet, almost invisible to the casual eye. But every beam and bolt was placed with intention. As the building began to take shape, I created spaces designed for utility and purpose. Open studios for emerging artists, rooms for educational workshops, communal areas where residents could gather without fear or oversight. Green spaces were incorporated wherever possible. Strips of lawn and small gardens that provided a sense of calm, spaces where children could play safely and neighbors could sit in the shade. Each choice was calculated, a careful combination of aesthetics and functionality, designed to foster growth and connection without fanfare. Legal structures and financial protections were layered behind the scenes, ensuring anonymity and shielding the project from interference. I set up trusts, shell corporations, and layered contracts, all structured to allow the work to proceed independently of my personal identity. I became accustomed to the paradox of influence without recognition. I realized that the most powerful impact did not require visibility. The quiet placement of resources, the careful orchestration of opportunity, and the subtle shaping of environments could yield profound results. I watched as local artists began to occupy the studios, as small classes for youth filled the rooms I had prepared, and as the neighborhood slowly responded to the changes. People smiled more often, lingered in public spaces, and a sense of care began to permeate the block. None of this required announcements, ribbon cuttings, or media attention. The effect was organic, growing in response to systems I had quietly put in place. Each day reinforced a sense of control I had never felt in my prior life of deadlines, client meetings, and surface-level accomplishments. Here, my actions rippled outward without drama, reshaping the world quietly, predictably, and effectively. I became attuned to the subtle dynamics of power exercised not through visibility, but through structure, foresight, and discretion. The warehouse became a nucleus of transformation, a hub that connected talent, resources, and ambition without the need for public acknowledgement. The city around it moved on in its usual chaos, unaware of the careful work occurring just beyond notice, yet feeling its effects in small, tangible ways. In this period, I discovered the deep satisfaction of systemic influence. Each blueprint I drew, each contract I signed, each landscape carefully cultivated, reinforced my conviction that control did not require spectacle. The work itself became my measure of accomplishment. In the silence of the renovated warehouse, among the brushstrokes of young artists, the laughter of children in green courtyards, and the gentle hum of lives quietly improved, I felt a clarity I had never experienced before. Influence, I realized, was not about being seen, it was about being effective. And in that realization, I found a profound sense of peace and purpose, a growing certainty that the world could be shaped, quietly but irrevocably, by steady, patient hands. Over time, I began to notice the subtle shifts in attention directed toward my work. Former colleagues, old acquaintances, and distant contacts started reaching out, their interest thinly veiled beneath professional courtesy. Invitations arrived for meetings, collaborations, and networking events where value was measured not in genuine connection, but in influence, wealth, and status. Each message, each phone call, each unsolicited proposal carried an unmistakable undertone, a recognition of what I had quietly built, and a desire to extract advantage from it. I felt a tension in these interactions, a dual awareness that I had stepped into a different plane of existence, while others remained tethered to the familiar rules of recognition and gain. The very people who had once dismissed me now sought association, yet their attention was transactional, predicated entirely on what my resources could offer. I understood the substitution clearly. Authentic relationships were being replaced by material interest and social leverage. The realization was unsettling, but it brought clarity as well. I could see the contours of human motives more sharply than before, and in that clarity, I recognized my own freedom. Every approach I received became a test of discipline. I refused to compromise, to entertain superficial engagements, or to allow my boundaries to be blurred. Invitations were declined, proposals were ignored, and offers that once might have seemed flattering or advantageous were now seen for what they truly were. My responses were deliberate, measured, and consistent. I maintained an internal ledger, not of transactions, but of integrity, keeping my actions aligned with the principles I had begun to embrace: autonomy, discretion, and the preservation of my personal and professional space. The challenge was not in the refusals themselves, but in the constant vigilance required to sustain them. There were moments when the lure of recognition or the subtle pull of nostalgia tempted me to deviate, when memories of past habits whispered that compromise was easier than solitude. I learned to observe these impulses without succumbing, to treat them as passing phenomena, and to return to the deliberate path I had chosen. Each moment of resistance strengthened a quiet internal authority that felt more substantial than any external validation. I began to perceive the shadows of the past not as burdens, but as markers, reminders of the habits and dependencies I had outgrown. Every invitation rooted in status or wealth was a reflection of the world I had once navigated, a world defined by appearances, approvals, and external measures of success. By declining them, I drew a boundary not only around my present projects but around the self I was cultivating: independent, focused, and unconcerned with the applause of others. There was a subtle satisfaction in this selective engagement. I observed the world continue its cycles of ambition and networking, yet I operated in parallel, invisible yet effective. My projects moved forward quietly, benefiting from decisions made with clear intent rather than public scrutiny. The artists, the students, and the neighborhood residents experienced tangible improvements, unaware of the unyielding standards I imposed on myself to protect these spaces. In their small triumphs, I found validation not in recognition, but in the evidence of change itself. By the end of this period, I understood that true strength was not measured by wealth, influence, or attention, but by the capacity to act without compromise, to preserve one's vision amid the subtle pressures of expectation. Each refusal, each boundary upheld, became a pillar of the inner structure I was constructing: resilient, unshakable, and quietly authoritative. Shadows of the past lingered, but they no longer dictated my path. They existed only as a contrast, illuminating the autonomy I had painstakingly claimed and the clarity that came from refusing the false allure of status and convenience. I decided to channel the resources now available to me toward lasting and meaningful influence, moving beyond the ephemeral measures of wealth and recognition. I structured a foundation to support young professionals and creative individuals, designing programs that offered not only financial assistance, but also mentorship, practical skills, and educational opportunities. Each initiative was planned carefully, with measurable outcomes and a long-term vision, ensuring that support was not fleeting, but enduring. I took pleasure in the quiet discipline of these decisions, in knowing that the lives I touched could change in ways I would never fully witness, yet that impact existed nonetheless. At the same time, I continued the redevelopment project, approaching it as more than a commercial endeavor. The industrial site I had acquired evolved into a residential and cultural complex designed with intention. Streets were laid out to feel safe and human-scaled, green spaces were integrated into every corner, and communal areas encouraged connection without imposing it. I oversaw each detail personally, from the placement of benches to the light that filtered through windows, understanding that the environment itself could shape behavior, comfort, and a sense of belonging. Every structural choice, every allocation of resources, became a deliberate act of creation, a manifestation of the principles I had begun to live by: intentionality, service, and measured influence. Each day assumed the character of work, not only in the physical or financial sense, but as an exercise in shaping human experience. Meetings with artists, educators, and residents were quiet yet profound. I observed their needs, guided projects, and facilitated opportunities, taking care that my involvement was enabling rather than controlling. There was an emerging rhythm to this life, an internal cadence that no corporate hierarchy or social expectation could disrupt. I felt the slow accumulation of authority derived not from titles, accolades, or publicity, but from the consistent, disciplined execution of thoughtful action. I also discovered a subtle but profound satisfaction in the anonymity of my efforts. My influence was not heralded by media coverage or public announcements. It existed in the improved quality of life, in the laughter and concentration of those using the spaces I had shaped, in the sense of hope and possibility among the young professionals who received mentorship. These tangible effects contrasted sharply with the hollow recognition I had once sought, reinforcing that true impact is measured in the quiet transformations of daily experience rather than the applause of others. Through the foundation and the development project, I constructed more than buildings or programs. I constructed a framework for enduring value, a system in which intention, care, and attention to detail produced measurable improvement in human lives. Each day reinforced the feeling of competence and purpose, a calm authority grounded in tangible results rather than social validation. I realized that creation, in its most fulfilling form, is not ephemeral or performative. It is the patient, precise, and often invisible act of shaping circumstances, of establishing structures that endure and nurture life beyond oneself. By the end of each week, I could walk through the spaces I had transformed and feel a steady, unspoken connection to the people within them. The streetlights glowed over safe sidewalks, children played in green courtyards, artists and students moved confidently through studios and workshops, and I recognized that my work had become a vessel for continuity and care. My sense of belonging shifted from the personal to the systemic. I belonged to the structures I had created, to the ongoing ripple of opportunities and safety I had set in motion. Each choice, each investment, each small intervention was a deliberate act of creation, a quiet rebellion against the chaos of life dictated by others, a testimony to the power of thoughtful, disciplined influence. I felt, perhaps for the first time in years, the fusion of control and freedom. Control over the systems, over the allocation of resources, over the unfolding of projects, combined with freedom from dependence on recognition, approval, or external validation. The work itself became its own reward. Each morning, as I walked through the complex, observing people living, learning, creating, and connecting, I felt a steady certainty. True accomplishment was not in the accumulation of wealth or prestige, but in the careful, persistent construction of environments and opportunities that enabled life to flourish. Each day was an exercise in quiet mastery, a tangible demonstration that influence could be wielded with patience, care, and discretion, and that the results of deliberate creation were far more enduring than any fleeting applause. By the time the final phase of the redevelopment was complete, the neighborhood had transformed into a space where people truly felt secure, connected, and seen. Families walked along the wide sidewalks, children ran freely through the green courtyards, and artists displayed their work in studios that had once been empty, abandoned warehouses. The foundation I had built was no longer an abstract project. It manifested in the lives it touched. Young professionals received guidance and resources to pursue their ambitions, and creative individuals discovered space and encouragement to experiment and grow. I observed the tangible results quietly, knowing that the subtle, persistent work of years had created change that could outlast me. Externally, I appeared to live an ordinary life, carrying out routines that suggested stability and detachment from the world. Internally, I had become a different person. The anxieties and compulsions that once ruled my existence had lost their grip. Past failures, losses, and the weight of expectation no longer defined me. Money, which had once seemed both a measure and a master of success, was now a tool, carefully directed, without emotion attached. Recognition, once so desperately sought, had become irrelevant. I understood that the true metric of life was not applause or status, but the quiet effectiveness of deliberate choices and the resilience of systems created thoughtfully. Each decision I made carried a sense of ownership and clarity. Whether adjusting schedules for the Foundation's programs, supervising the maintenance of public spaces, or reviewing architectural plans for small expansions, I acted with full awareness of the consequences and the freedom to act without coercion or external pressure. The work itself had become a mirror of my internal state, disciplined, balanced, and intentional. I recognized the rhythm of this life, one that combined purpose with calm observation, effort with patience, and influence with discretion. Walking through the streets of the new district, I noted the details I had designed to enhance life and community. Benches positioned to encourage conversation yet allow solitude, sunlight filtering into courtyards just as the seasons shifted, quiet corners for reading or reflection, small trees planted to offer shade and privacy. I saw residents pause to appreciate these spaces, to linger and interact, unaware of the careful planning that shaped their experience. The knowledge that my efforts facilitated these moments without requiring them to acknowledge me filled me with a quiet satisfaction far beyond any reward I could have imagined. I realized that the victory I had pursued was not tangible in conventional terms. It was not wealth accumulated, accolades received, or fame achieved. It was the ability to construct a world in which life could unfold with safety, opportunity, and dignity. It was the independence to act without attachment to external validation, to shape spaces and systems that reflected my values and sustained those values beyond my immediate presence. I felt harmony in each movement, in each choice, in the unspoken alignment of intention and impact. As the sun set over the district, casting long shadows across the streets, I walked slowly along the pathways I had helped to create. Residents waved or smiled as they passed, some unaware of my presence, others merely acknowledging a familiar figure. Children's laughter echoed from a playground, a soft symphony of life unfolding. I paused, taking in the sight, feeling the quiet continuity of human activity and the subtle imprint of my work upon it. I understood, fully and without hesitation, that true success was not measured by what the world thought of me, but by the quality of the world I had chosen to shape and inhabit.